palun olge head, jätkame meie konverentsi tööd, võtke istet, muidu on seda keeruline teha, foon on liiga tugev. Ja mul on palve siis ka nendele inimestele teada anda, kes seal all on veel, et nad nüüd üles liiguksid ja kohad sisse võtaksid. Me oleme siin 5 minutit nüüd üle läinud, et kokku lepitud ajast, aga ei hullu midagi. Nüüd järgmisena on mul hea meel sisse juhatada üks meie 2 pärastlõunasest paneelist ja see on siis esimene paneel, mis on pühendatud pigem vaatele väljas sisse, võrdlusele, kuidas on neil võrreldes meiega, ja teine paneel, mis sellele pärast kohvipausi järgneb, on pühendatud siis juba sellele vaatele seestpoolt, mida annaks teistelt õppida, mida annaks teha teisiti. Ja alustaksime siis esimese paneeliga ja siin on mul hea meel tutvustada teile meie paneliste, kes tegelikult, tore on tõdeda, kõik tulevad mõnes mõttes ka väikestest, et mitte öelda väiksematest riikidest. Aga alustame siis vasakult paremale on Nele Eichhorn, ta on Euroopa Komisjonis tööl, mis direktoraat see praegu on?
Praegu ma töötan peasekretäriaadis.
Peasekretäriaadis, ma ei julge sellepärast öeldagi. On töötanud ka meil Eesti Majandus- ja Kommunikatsiooniministeeriumis ja paneb seda pilti meile kokku nii siit kui sealt poolt, nii Brüsseli poolt kui oma kogemuse pinnalt, nii siit kui sealt. Siis on meil Veiko Spolitis, kes on tuntud mees, esineb ka Eesti meedias tihtipeale, täna ta räägib meil selles paneelis inglise keeles, aga ta on ka eesti keeles kõva kõneleja. Ainukene viis ongi ohjata teda natukene selle teise keelega. ja ta on täna Läti kaitseministeeriumi, meie mõistes siis aseminister võib öelda, jah. Ja Helsingi ülikooli doktorant, kes on ka väga palju teinud Läti riigi heaks tööd ja samas omab ka otse touchi Eestisse, nagu me teame. Siis järgmine on Katju Holkeri, kes töötab Soome rahandusministeeriumis ja kes oli ka üks ekspertidest selle meilgi mitu korda tsiteerimist leidnud ja täna võib-olla isegi veel vähem, aga me kindlasti tuleme nende teemade juurde veel korduvalt Eestis tagasi OECD ühtse riigivalitsemise raporti koostamisel. Ja viimane meie panelistidest on siis Piet Boerefijn, kes on Eestis tuntud kui toidupanga ja rajaja ja on ka 2010. aastal valitud Eesti kodanikuks ja kellel on hästi selline tugev sissevaade nii Eesti ühiskonda kui ka oma taustsüsteemi. Ja edasi ma lähen nüüd sujuvalt üle inglise keelele, arvestades, et meie panelistidest on inglise keele valdajad mitmed ja teiseks ka ma arvan, et kui küsimused hakkavad tulema, siis ma usun, et me saame hakkama, et kui inglise keeles ei ole soovi esitada, on soovi eesti keeles esitada, siis me saame siin jooksutõlkega ka hakkama. Well, let's start. The purpose of this panel was actually designed to be a kind of view from outside. A view from outside towards Estonia as a small-scale state and the governance issues related. And therefore, we asked people who have personal touch to issues to give their views during this panel. And we also will have a kind of Q&A session which will be following. And first I would start with you, Katju, because you have worked for a very, very important organization, OECD, who made a report about the governance issues. And this is the cornerstone of our self-evaluation as well. So please, as we agreed, we will have 5-7 minutes introductory from each panelist, and then after that there will be a discussion and Q&As. Floor is yours, please.
Thank you. It's my pleasure to be here today, and really I come from the Finnish Ministry of Finance, like was said, but from the governance policy side. I think it's always a little bit difficult to speak about another country, so I will also reflect, use Finland as an example and take up some issues very quickly, but because I think we have a lot in common, Estonia and Finland, with the challenges and some of our strengths as well. But I first wanted to say that I think that Estonia has a very impressive reform history with very good results. And I think one of the strengths is that Estonia has been very quick to react and has been very agile. Looking from Finland, I think you could say courageous even. However, I think there are the everlasting problems that most of our governments have, be they big or small. I think they're also here. And I think in the OECD report, it was talked that Estonia has these hybrid governance structures with strong vertical silos, legalistic arrangements, and many informal networks. This has also been spoken here today. I think all these are good things to have, but they also bring challenges as well. And this also resembles Finland. I think these three issues, strong vertical silos, legalistic arrangements, many informal networks, are something that we have. And we also, I think Estonia and Finland share that we have efficiency as a strength, very effective governments. But what we have just realized in Finland, we've been working with the Governments for the Future project, that we are very efficient in producing, from these vertical silos, strategies, decisions, guidelines, decisions in principle, all sorts of very quickly, and if one strategy doesn't work, okay, we get the next one. So we are very effective in producing decisions, but we are not anymore sure whether we are that effective or whether we have that impact that we actually bring about the changes in the society. Whether it's just decision after decision, but not so much getting the actual change to happen. And that is actually the name of a report that we just wrote on the Governments for the Future, which was a 5 countries working together, Scotland, United Kingdom, Sweden, Finland, and Austria. But this was the report that where we reflected Finland in the mirror. And one particular thing behind this phenomenon that we are able to produce these decisions from these vertical silos is that we are rather fragmented. We are fragmented in structures, but also in processes. And this brings about that the evidence base, we don't actually have this kind of good solid evidence base that would help bring about change, but we have a fragmented evidence base. We have fragmented processes, and we have those processes that should be integrating our strategies, like the processes like our government program process, government program implementation process, the budget process, or the legislative process are not close enough, not integrated, they're fragmented from each other. And then again, the implementation process in Finland, for instance, the performance management process, is fragmented from these other processes like budget process or the strategy process. And we have too much thinking that policies are self-executing, and we don't pay enough attention to this. And I think that this Government for the Future work has been important to us, and I think one thing that is also the strength here in Estonia as well as in Finland is the learning from others. It's not so much about models, it's about ideas. And that's why I want to bring from the Governments for the Future still just a few points. When this is our challenge, we also thought that the fatal questions for Finland in the future, all based on the fact that not something that we did wrong in the past, but on the fact that future has changed, the future is different, we have these wicked problems, everything is interlinked to each other. And the one fatal question that we have and that we realize that we can no longer just look about the administrative side, we actually have to look when we reform in the future about the whole political and administrative sides both together. So we can not just look at this box, government administration, but we also need to look at the political decision-making side at the same time, because these issues are such. We also need to look about what is left from the new public. We were not the most new public management country, Finland, but we have some shadows. What is left from that? What should we have? Something new. And then one very important thing that we paid quite a lot of attention in our reports, but where we don't have much solutions, and where I could see from the government at a glance, the OECD publication, that Estonia actually has the same problem, is the issue of trust. Because we can see that average in the OECD countries, the trust has gone down -5% in the last 5 years, if I remember correctly. But here it has been -15, and in Finland it has been -16. And this is important, not just about the trust of citizens and society towards government, but we find also the internal trust between, for instance, politicians and civil servants is important in our case. And now what we are looking for is kind of more integrated, and we are starting I talked about the processes that are fragmented, and we're actually launching a new project on that just beginning of December. And maybe to cut a little bit, I have too many things, so I'll just say one thing. I think that it is also important not just what we should do, but how we pay a lot of attention on the kind of how people work in the government, how everybody needs to change their working style. That is very much part of it, to work more and more together, not so much perhaps centralizing, but using the term working together. And there, my final point is the strength of the informal networks is very important, like it has been mentioned here many times and is also in Finland. But you have to remember in that issue as well, the other side, the openness, and that is also very important. These informal networks cannot be a secret society, so you have to have the openness, and that's one thing that we also, at least in Finland, need to pay a lot of attention in the future. So.
Thank you. Well, I have to admit that I spotted a lot of real similarities, at least in my opinion, between Finland and Estonia, but at the same time, indeed, we have looked upon Finland from beneath to above, in a sense, and it has been a kind of example for Estonia, but my thesis is now that, and you have confirmed somehow already during your speech, that there is a danger that actually change circumstances are not entirely met by even the mindset of public sector yet entirely, and it means also that sooner or later mistakes takes place, and mistakes should be avoided. At least wise are being considered wise because they are capable to avoid not their own mistakes maybe, but at least others. Well, anyway, Nele, from your perspective, you've been working for the public sector and in Estonia, and you've been now in Brussels. What is your assessment of these issues?
Well, indeed, I've spent a third of my life in Brussels by now, in different capacities, but today I would like to offer a very personal insight to these two countries of Estonia and Belgium. Let's be clear, there is very little that is actually small about Belgium. If we look at, the population is roughly 9 times that of Estonia, the GDP is much, much bigger. Not even the external debt is small in Belgium. But what I would like to offer is perhaps some analysis on how Belgium addresses its smallness by looking at how it deals with its location, how it has made itself very attractive to people and business, and third of all, what is the negotiation strategy and the use of power internally and externally. First of all, it is no surprise that Belgium, of course, is very beneficially located. It is very aware of its location and is really deeply integrated, business-wise, politically, and cross-border exchange of people, services, goods is very topical, and they are also very good at enforcing cross-border. So if you have, for instance, traffic infringements, those things. So this is an extremely important dimension, the genuine integration. So Benelux as a region has definitely not lost its importance. So the question I would like to pose perhaps is that has the Baltics lost its meaning as a region, and is Estonia doing enough? The second perspective or analysis point I would like to offer is about their attractiveness, because Belgium is really a people magnet still. The population is growing. They have exceeded 11 million a few years ago. And according to some expat studies, Belgium is really, among the expat population, 19th in the world. And this is because of the level, of course, the social security level is very high and develops, but also the society is very multicultural. And this makes it attractive. And Belgians, of course, due to historical and other reasons, they are multicultural. They speak Flemish and French and German, but they really have turned this into their benefit. So clearly, it's an attractive location. Also, they have a very low salary gap between men and women, which is quite remarkable. Concerning the public sphere, it is a very tightly knit society, nevertheless. For instance, according to OECD, 92% of people believe that they know someone who they could rely on. So socially, there is it's a tight-knit one society. Apart from the quality of the workforce and the quality of the society, I would like to now reflect this a bit from Estonian perspective and about the closeness, because of course the territory of Estonia is much bigger and people don't live physically that close together. So for policy and for governance reasons, there could be scope, of course, to think internally how to manage that. But the thought I would like to leave with you today is also that there is a need perhaps to think how to manage or how to liaise meaningfully with the people who live outside of Estonia, who are Estonians and who, for some or the other reason, still like to think of themselves as Estonians. It is not entirely a governance issue, of course. For instance, there could be scope to think beyond, tax collection and schooling obligation and so on, to think about how to use the revenue, for instance, generated by the diaspora living abroad or people working abroad, how they could, for instance, contribute to the charity sector in Estonia, by that help, through the third sector, sort of compensate for some of the functions which the local governments cannot perhaps fulfill. Think about ways to finance education, social care, long-term care. Because, believe it or not, it would seem that because people care, they would like to, give back to Estonia, and that perhaps could be a way to compensate for not having all the population physically living in a country, how to network them and really how to use them as a resource. And not only, of course, their financial means, but also their expertise and know-how. So instead of thinking only about the sort of the virtual networking, but also perhaps this could be a dimension to turn it into really physical benefit as well. And finally, so that kind of is my thought about using the ideational capacity of people, so pooling the ideas of those here with those who are physically not living in the territory of Estonia. And third of all, I've always wondered the negotiation capacity of the Belgians and Belgium. I mean, because the country is administratively extremely complex, there is no secret about it. It costs a lot to maintain, there is no secret about it. And it hinges on a cascade of delicate balance historical agreements. But that makes the society and political system geared towards compromise, and this is what they are playing also very strongly internationally. So they have profiled themselves very clearly as those who mediate, those who seek compromises, allow others to reach compromises. And I mean, they're renowned for that. Now for Estonia, I would think, especially thinking about what has been achieved in EU policy and EU politics by Estonian government these years, and not only the government, but also, of course, with the input of the private sector experts, is that Estonia, if it pulls its force, it's a very strong expertise provider. For instance, what was achieved with bringing the digital agenda, digital internal market, really to the highest level of attention, I think shows that this, that small can also be very big in some issues. So this would have been what I wanted to say.
Thank you very much. And let's move further on and let's continue with a Latvian perspective. Latvia is a dearest neighbor of Estonia, and obviously if we look at Finland from certain position, we shall admit that we are doing the same with Latvia, but from the different position. I'm trying to word it politely, but it's actually not a wise way to do things. On the other hand, Latvia is one of the most integrated, economically most integrated with Estonia, in a sense. Estonians have been the most intensively investing into Latvia during good years, and even during not the best years, Estonians' presence has been a very strong one, and including other things, Estonians are also not providing only investments, they are providing also people sometimes for management purposes, for top management purposes in Latvian-based companies. Very often, or mainly, I think it's case with foreign-owned, Scandinavian, very often owned companies where Estonians are managers for Latvian soil-based subsidiaries. But anyway, there is a strong touch. It's a cultural, it's historical background which joins us. It's even genetical pool, which, as I've learned, joined us very strongly. And now, in a sense, we are at the very same path. If you look at all the events, all the processes which have taken place so far, they are very much similar in Estonia and Latvia, majority of them at least. And the moves which have made, and including the achievements which have been achieved, like memberships, they're basically the same path. Latvia sometimes slightly behind, but it doesn't change the fact that Latvia at the same time is also bigger. So, as it was very clearly put by the president this morning also. So what is your assessment, Veiko, looking at Estonia from Latvian side and comparing Estonian, which you have deep personal touch also, Estonian insight with the Latvian insight?
Thank you, Raivo, for this lovely introduction and reminding about the revival of Livonia, because it's really, there is a potential, and perhaps we will touch in a Q&A session on this as well. But my presentation could be very, very short, because overwhelming majority in different polls and also by different statements of Latvian representatives of political elite have simply said that except beer and chocolate, everything else in Estonia is better. Period.
Ice hockey.
There's no ice hockey in Estonia by Latvian.
You can't compare uncomparable.
Yes. But I don't want to be short in my presentation, and basically what I want to say, I want to do two things, because we were given this topic of today's discussion, and the one thing is what we believe Estonia does pretty well, and then second point, what I want to elaborate is what is there in Latvia, which are those good examples which my colleague just said that both Finland and Estonia. And I believe Latvia as well is pretty good in emulating from other small states or from simply different countries. So all in all, I believe one of the best things which you have in Estonia is Koostöö Kogu, the place where we're sitting here, because the ability to cooperate, to talk these things, in a way shows the way out of certain cul-de-sac. Basically, idea is that we have the same problem in Latvia because there are discussions which should be taking place in political parties. So we discuss about the quality of representative democracy. And when you don't have a qualitative discussions within the political parties, then those are not transmitted into the parliament. If they are not transmitted in the parliament, they are not reflected also in a civil service. So it's all tied together, and basically it reminds me, we made an interview with Estonian President Toomas Hendrik Ilves about 4 years ago, and one of the questions was by a Latvian journalist that perhaps everything else in Estonia is better because your civil service is the best in the world. On what President, I believe, quite honestly answered that even though if we could have the best civil service in the world, still they would have to listen to the politicians. So you cannot divide civil service and the civic society and political system. So they are intimately tied. So therefore, while talking about the things which are pretty good in Estonia, I want to start with one very simple thing, which in Latvia is an enormous debate right at this moment, and I want to remind you the preamble of Estonian constitution. Sorry, I will quickly read through it because I believe on a daily basis, perhaps legal experts are reading this, but with unwavering faith and steadfast will to strengthen and develop the state, which is established on the inextinguishable right of the people of Estonia to national self-determination, and which was proclaimed on 24th February 1918, which is founded on liberty, justice, and law, which shall protect internal and external peace, and is a pledge to present and future generations for their social progress and welfare, which shall guarantee the preservation of Estonian nation, language, and culture through the ages, the people of Estonia on the basis of Article 1 of the Constitution, which was entered into the first 1938, etc., etc. Well done. We in Latvia don't have it. We have enormous debates, and it's very hard to achieve a consensus to have preamble in our constitution. So, continuing with what is there, what Latvians cherish, what is in Estonia. So basically, we go on very often on cultural terms, that Estonians are more steadfast, they have a very strong spines, they don't bind to the different wills of our neighbors or the bigger nations. They spend 2% of defense. They have done legal and economic reforms. There is almost no corruption. If you look on most of the comparisons on the Transparency International Index, on the doing business and so on, Estonia is far ahead, not only of Latvia, but also of Lithuania. There are Estonian cultural newspapers, even though there is a whole debate about SIRP at this very moment. In Latvia, we have only one cultural paper, because when the austerity measures were taken, we basically killed all of them. There is Estonian education reform, which is done. Even though many in Estonia cherish Latvian administrative territorial reform, and actually it has been total fallout, it's been disaster. In a way, okay, you are moving into that direction, and I believe you are smart enough. If you move on, you will finish it, and it will be smart enough. Estonia has already well-ranked universities. We just heard Tiina Randma with her colleague presenting here. I mean, you wish to have it in Latvia. We don't have it. We don't discuss it, so you have it, so it's marvelous. Your healthcare system, it's not a surprise. Most of the people from Valka go into the hospital in Valga because it's just because there's a hospital, and also most of the Valka people should go to the hospital to Valmiera. So we could continue and continue and continue, but at the same time, we also have to go on and be honest to what Latvia has done, and I believe there are certain things which Latvia has done, because austerity measures really worked well, and all what Latvia has basically been doing, it's been learning from Scandinavian countries and Estonia. It's the mandatory tax and property declaration system, the changes in the criminal law, the education reform which is ongoing, the police reform which is ongoing, and so on and so forth. All these things, there is no problem. Most of Latvian politicians don't have a shame to admit that, yes, we emulate Estonia. But what we have done in Latvia is we this year passed quite revolutionary amendments in citizenship law. So we finally have a double citizenship with the citizens of the EU, NATO countries, and the biggest populations which we have in Australia, New Zealand, and Brazil. We also have learning, actually, both from Eesti Ringhääling, Yle, Finland, and BBC. We are transforming our public broadcasting system because we understand for Latvian culture and language to survive, it's very, very important to have a strong public broadcasting system. So in this sense, we are doing and we are following the way what Finland, Great Britain, and Estonia shows us. At the same time, it opens up the question of efficiency, and it's been up in a year. It's been in a report done by Anvar Samast and Andrus Razans that perhaps we could have a common English and Russian-speaking news portal which would distribute news about the Baltic states in English and in Russian, for example. There is one thing, there is Latvian cultural canon, which has basically people from intelligentsia and cultural sphere have basically got together for 3 years and decided which things Latvians cherish most, so put it in one solid list. They've done it. Also, there is understanding on similarity with Estonia. Toome eestlased koju, we have quite different. We simply speak about the global Latvian, basically all the things which you have to do in Latvia at home, so they could be connected with the means of modern communication technologies. At the same time, also Ministry of Foreign Affairs has designated a special ambassador for relations with diaspora. So those, in a short, are the things which we've done, and I believe these are the things which Estonia also can emulate from Latvia. And this is so much about my short introduction.
Okay, thank you very much. And let's move to the fourth panelist, who is a person being officially elected as most cherished person of year 2010 as a citizen of the year. Piet, you've been heavily known as a charity-related person in Estonia, but you're not only a charity person, you have a lot of experience of your own and engagement in different activities and background and everything, which leads probably you to some conclusions when you make comparisons between Estonia and other small states you have experience with.
Mm-hmm. Yes, I came as a geographer. I came 20 years ago to Estonia. But I saw in Estonia, in fact, there's no need for geographers. There's a need for people who want to develop social work, because in that time the situation in the hospitals, in the children homes, in the care homes, etc., was very, very bad. So I started to work for a fund, 35 private Dutch fund, and we supported all over Estonia projects for elderly people and handicapped people and children, etc. So I've seen quite a bit of Estonian local governments and institutions and NGOs, etc. And I really started to love Estonia. I fell in love with Estonia because I saw the problems 20 years ago, the lack of money, the lack of possibilities, and also the hard work all the Estonians did in order to improve the situation. If you at the moment compare Estonia with how it was 20 years ago, it's quite incredible. I think that there's not one country in the world, what in 20 years, where you could see really changes in all fields, huge changes. I think Estonia made very strategic decisions. I think Estonia is very pragmatic. I think Estonia is very innovative, very flexible, very fast. These are all very positive things. At the moment, what worries me is that the amount of people. So I just make a comparison between Estonia and Holland. Let's say the size of Estonia is 10% bigger than the Netherlands. Territory. In Estonia live 1.3 million people, in the Netherlands 16.8 million people. The Netherlands is the most densely populated country in Europe. Population density per square meter is 14 times higher in the Netherlands than in Estonia. But what is really the biggest problem, since 1989, the Netherlands got a population development. At the moment there are 13% more people living in the Netherlands. In Estonia it's the opposite. Now there are 18%, almost a fifth of the people left, or just fewer people. People died, but a lot of people left. I think this is a very serious problem, because one way or another you live in a very cold corner of Europe, and still you have to pay for all the cost. And soon I've seen many small villages and farmsteads and homes which are just empty, and still the state has to pay for everything, like infrastructure, electricity, schools, etc. Of course, the GDP in the Netherlands per capita is much higher than in Estonia. It's 3 times higher. So in the Netherlands, it's much easier to organize things, to pay for things. But one thing which is also quite worrisome is that in Estonia only 16% of GDP is spent on social spending, on social support. In the Netherlands it's double, it's 32%. But also the Netherlands has a much higher GDP per capita. So let's say in Holland there's almost 6 times more money available for social support, for social security, for social projects. So I think also in Estonia that's a big problem. A lot of elderly people, handicapped people, big families, people who are unemployed. There's not enough money to provide services and to help them. Another problem is, I think Latvia had one really big advantage over Estonia. In Latvia they made administrative reform. I think, when was it, 10 years ago, or 6 years ago?
It's a tricky issue.
So I think Estonia really should do very quickly administrative reform, because if you are small, you have to be effective, and with 215 local governments on such a small population, that's not very effective. For example, in the Netherlands, the average amount of inhabitants per municipality is almost 40,000. In Estonia, it's 6,800. So in the Netherlands, average municipality is 6 times bigger than an Estonian one. For example, in Estonia are 172 local governments with less than 5,000 inhabitants. In Holland, there are only 8 local governments with less than 5,000 inhabitants. Yeah, and I think Estonia could maybe learn from Holland and Belgium and Luxembourg. That I think in Holland we have a long tradition of cooperation with the neighbors, and it's a very good cooperation, very strong cooperation. For example, the Dutch and the German army cooperate a lot. The Dutch and the Belgian Navy, they're almost integrated already. And Estonia is a small country with, let's say, relatively a lack of money. I think you should also invest in a wiser way and cooperate much more with Latvia and Finland and Lithuania in the field of defense, in the field of science, in promoting tourism. There are many fields where you can cooperate. So.
Okay. Before I will give a floor to participants, In the audience, I will ask all our panelists the same question. Would you give me a kind of issues or list of issues or at least description of problems which you, in your countries from where you are coming, which are, or living nowadays, which are also considered small countries, would be done differently if they wouldn't be small countries? Meaning that if, for example, Holland will not be a powerhouse in the sense of GDP, which is actually bringing Holland up to the category of big countries by economical output, then let's say, would Holland be a different country? Would they do something differently, or Finland, or Latvia, or Belgium, for example, today?
No, but also in the Netherlands there's a crisis, and also in the Netherlands, they have a very nice embassy here in Tallinn, but they were thinking of closing the embassy. You know, I think even...
Don't do it. Ambassador is good friend.
No, but I think even, let's say, if you are a powerhouse, I think everywhere in Europe, governments are looking to spendings, and so you have to be extremely effective and efficient with the money you have, and all the time change and adapt the things you are doing.
So we can call it a kind of optimization task, and it's imminent for small countries.
Yeah.
You agree with it?
I was speaking about optimization. For Latvian present situation, one of the biggest issues is to achieve really the consensus in society, because let's be honest, the one part of society pretty much sees that if Russia comes back, it's pretty much fine. Other part thinks that our strategic decisions which we made, similar to Estonia, those are the valid ones. So when you have split society, then it doesn't lead anywhere. So therefore, answering to your question, it's very simple. If you made a strategic decision, if you want to be and live up to the standards which are there in the EU, which are globally recognized, you have to do your work. As simple as that. And okay, everyone has heard about the terrible tragedy which happened last Friday. It has unified people for a certain moment, but even some few days already after the morning today, actually, those search and rescue officers are buried. But already the propaganda machine starts, political squabbles start again. So the idea is, it's a hard labor. It's a lesson. You don't build democratic state in 20 years and believe that it will have the same standards as Finland or Netherlands or Great Britain with Magna Carta and so on. So of course we can go and legally discuss when really democracy was started in Great Britain. But still, we have a little bit more than 20 years for experience in democracy. So it takes time.
Yes, Nele.
Well, for instance, the European Commission has this year suggested to Belgium that they should introduce more competition in their services industries especially, but also, of course, energy sector, telecoms. So it is, I believe, it is not, of course, only for small states a very vital issue, but competition in economy to drive down prices or at least keep price levels in check is something that is valuable. It needs to be looked at.
Good.
Yeah, maybe two things. One thing that is more of a where Finland is large is the territorial thing, and that is actually maybe one of our biggest challenges at the moment, as we have the municipal reform going on. Exactly. that most of our people live in the south, and then we have a huge area, and it's really, really difficult to tackle with the question of public services and merging of municipalities when there are so few people, for instance, in the north and east, then the municipalities will become territorially so huge. And how to still provide services, also the age structure in some of the municipalities is really challenging. So that gives a kind of a, we have the small issue, but in this territorial aspect we have the big issues, and the combination of small population and big territory is really, really challenging in this. But then one thing that I was thinking earlier that maybe Estonia is better here than in Finland, and maybe Finland, so it's not so much small, big country, but I think in the issue of Finland, what we might be doing better, because this is perhaps also a mental issue, if we were a bigger country, is risk-taking. We're very risk-averse people. We don't take risks, and that's very in the government, maybe in the private sector more, but also in the government we should do more controlled risk-taking, at least to some extent, to be more innovative. And I think if we were a bigger country, we might have more kind of a we might find that we might be more confident in this risk-taking. This is really something that we struggle. We are trying to change this and maybe do more experiments that can be cut down and then said, okay, this didn't succeed. But nowadays we are doing only things that we are relatively sure will somehow succeed. So we are not taking that much risks, and I think we would have the mental confidence more if we were a population was bigger.
Yeah, but at the same time I've read...
But I think Estonia is a small country with this, not with this problem that we have. So
it's a big
not
heart.
so, yeah.
At the same time, I've read reports which have been written by Finnish experts about necessity of taking risks in the form of the experimental economical policy, which actually is a kind of even invention as a terminology by Finns. So
You just add, we talk a lot about the necessity of risk-taking, but nobody does it. We all know that it should be a good thing to do, but it's not there yet.
Which leads me also to another question, which probably, from my personal experience, is related to the comparison between smaller states and bigger states I've been dealing with. In big states, the state organization has a very long-lasting, heavy heritage problem. And it's much more grave, in a sense, sometimes, than in smaller states. Small states are more capable for changes, for agile reactions, at least, if nothing else, even at least in crisis situations. But big states, they don't care. Just as an example, the neighboring state of ours, Russia, I don't know how much it's known, but the actual amount of public servants in Russia has grown to the level exceeding the entire Soviet Union level before, 25 years ago. And we have to take into account that during the Soviet time it also included an enormous apparatus of semi-political nature like Communist Party organizations. So basically something, and it was a huge by itself. So basically something has gone differently in this country, and administrative apparatus is still bearing some signs of the heritage of the past. It's not exactly the case in small country cases, not transitional countries like ours, Latvia, Estonia, but also I think it's also in Netherlands and Belgium the same story. More conservative sometimes, I understand that, but not entirely. Is it true? Nele, Piet.
No, I can, from the Latvian perspective, what I can say is there is Danny Roderick, scholar in Harvard University, who has spelled out the impossibility trilemma. When you have you have triangle, you have the globalized economy, you have state sovereignty, and you have democracy. Basically, you cannot have all three of them in a globalized world. So this understanding is prevailing in Latvia. So basically, idea is if you don't cut your red tape, you are not competitive on global stage. So if you want to keep open markets which give you prosperity and democracy, it means you have to do something with sovereignty. It means you have to delegate certain traits of sovereignty, and this is what we face in the EU, either we want it or not. So the quality, of course, how do we delegate our sovereignty in subsidiary way, as it was reminded before here, this is another discussion. But in terms of cutting the red tape, for example, when austerity measures were there was no discussion because you cannot afford. You spend more than you earn. It means if you want to have your income in balance, then you have to cut your red tape. Simple as that.
Nele.
Well, yes, in a way you're spot on in saying that Belgium is quite a conservative, quite an established system because of the necessity to ensure that sort of delicate balance. It is there. However, they are very aware of the need to cut red tape. They have introduced an ID card, which in Estonia is a fact of life. It actually works. It's electronic. So some things are being taken up very well, also in Belgium. So.
No, I think Estonia is very efficient, well organized, and if I think, let's say, the rich states, the old states, people are much more afraid of changes, and governments are more afraid of changes. I think Estonia state is willing to take risks. For example, in the Netherlands, I think last year the average pension went down something like 1%, and it was like the biggest crisis in the world. Everybody was complaining, like, my pension is going down. It's a very small amount. And if you look to what happened in Estonia 5 years ago, how much salaries just were cut with 10, 20, 30%, and nobody was complaining. So in that sense, I think the whole of Europe can admire what the Estonian government has done so far, especially also in the crisis years. The same with Latvia. In Latvia it was even much deeper and severe, the measures they had to take. So.
But at the same time, we might argue, we might argue that part of this graveness of Latvian situation during the crisis was due to the lack of the foresight they had. Sorry to say that, but this lack of reserves and flexibility and dependency on the banking, like it has happened with many other countries in Europe, by the way, it has added additional weight to the crisis management challenges in comparison with us even. Sorry, yes, just Latvian comment and then you.
Just a Latvian comment indeed, because this is another example. Since early 90s in Estonia, you had the fiscal discipline law, which we passed only 2 years ago. So this fiscal discipline law, when the casino economy after Lehman Brothers ended, allowed Estonia and Riigikogu to come together and really slash the budget to make amendments which were imposed by the legal state of Estonia. In Latvia, we were forced to do it because simply the second biggest bank collapsed, and then afterwards, all what followed after that basically taught us a very, very severe question similar to Finland in early 90s. So therefore, obviously, another example how rationally the legal system which was created in early 90s in Estonia worked for a benefit of Estonia, managing its economy and transitioned through these dire straits pretty well.
Good.
And I think something that our countries have, because we have never perhaps allowed ourselves to be too pleased with ourselves because we are not major world players, is that we don't have perhaps the heavy heritage, but we have the heritage of continuous development. We all the time, we are a little bit, I think that all the time we see that this is not good enough, that we have to do better. So it's a gradual, continuous, and I think it was very well also shown this morning, and thank you to the translator who translated to me, the 4 steps, for instance, in Estonia. There's really been going on continuous development, and like it was said, now you have time to look what the administration is actually like, but still you're doing it all the time. You don't pause and say, okay, we are really good. And I think that's a very good heritage and very important heritage to keep.
But even though I would argue that even from your own presentations we can spot an idea that for a certain period, even in small states, some level of comfort comes up and people start to get a bit lazy about changes, if I may put it bluntly. And when something breaks out, like crisis is exactly the example, then people start to think again, and the advantage of small guys is that they can do it quickly, they can be agile, they can be capable, they are capable to do it immediately almost. And with big inertia systems and in big countries, it's not just possible because it's too big, too slow.
Yeah, but I think you're right in that there is always this point where we're starting to be lazy, but the engine never stops. So it's also really easy to restart it when there is a crisis, and that way kind of to continue. We never get to that point where we are too lazy. And another thing I think, which is probably might link to the small countries, and maybe here Scotland would be a good example, but also I think Estonia, Finland during crises. When we have a kind of a common goal, we see now we need to do this, then it's really easy to get all people abroad. Like the Scottish government is really interesting to look at because now they have this common goal of the Scottish independence, and now they are, whether it will never happen, but they still have kind of put their act together because they have a shared goal. And during the Finnish crisis in the beginning of 1990s, we had this kind of a shared goal to get out of the crisis, and that's something I think comes from the small community or the small country as well.
By the way, actually it leads to the question I wanted to ask you. What is the reason for the choice of partners in this report you've mentioned of 5 countries?
Yes.
How it come that these countries have been involved, not others?
Yes, it was actually the initiative was from Finland, so we asked the countries that we wanted to cooperate with in this case, and so the choice was ours. We asked...
Can you reveal the reasoning for this choice?
We have a central government reform going on where we want to do more joined-up governance, and therefore we wanted to look at Sweden, where we don't want to adapt the Swedish model, but we wanted to have one Nordic country, and therefore Sweden was interesting from a central government reform point of view. Scotland also, due to the same reason, they have a very joined-up government. They also have a very interesting national performance framework, which kind of links everything together. United Kingdom came with Scotland, and it's also very interesting to us because they have done also a lot of work in the areas integrating strategic and financial processes and so on that are important to us. And then Austria has done a relatively big performance budget reform just lately. Austria is a little bit different. They do very gradually their reforms, but very properly. They were quite interested in their way of doing, which seems to... We always, like I said, do new strategies and new strategy, but we never implement. But they do very kind of gradually and properly they hold on to their strategy and then they move forward. So that was very interesting to us. We also took Austria, Scotland, because of the size. We thought they
comparable size.
Yeah, that was because we didn't want to have to like Canada, for instance, would have been interesting, but it's so. And then we had to restrict the number of countries because we wanted to have a small group.
Mm-hmm. Workable, manageable.
Yeah. But now we will have the OECD, Finland, Estonia, because Estonia is also one of our favorite countries to cooperate with, so this is a choice also, but we have, so we're very pleased with that as well.
And this report of 5 countries is available?
Yes, there are actually 2 reports. One is the main report written by Professor Christopher Pollitt, and then there is this Finland in the Mirror decisions or changes, and they are available through our website. They're both in English, so it's so the Finnish report at this point.
Okay, thank you. It's time to move to the audience. Well, I see the first raised hand. As you probably noticed before you start with your question, as our dearest audience noticed, the view from outside looks so good that there is nothing even to do, no reason even to convene, because everything is much better than expected and pretty good anyway. Is it so? Think about it, please.
Actually, I have a question to Veiko. It's an announcement last hour, and this makes again difference between Estonia and Latvia. Latvian government said within last hour that they will resign. Estonian government has not. So what is the reason, and could you comment please on this issue?
Okay, I pretty much would agree that this is due to the strategic events because it was openly known that the state secretary, which is as a position of chancellor, in Estonia, Ministry of Economics had received bribes from that building company. Not bribes, but donations, let's put it correctly in brackets. Probably they've calculated that it's better to resign and then have a different setup, because it's long known that the political parties which are represented in a parliament been diluting themselves, and particularly the second best, the Reform Party, which before the new government was formed in 2011 was already losing 6 members, and now they've been in polls below 2% for the last 1.5 years. So I believe that the number of these reasons has triggered the reason why they have resigned.
I would ask a question which was actually raised during one of the presentations in the morning block, but it's very valid to ask now also from you. The third sector participation, how much do you see it worth and how it works in the countries, respective countries of yours, and if you compare it with the situation here? During the presentation of the second presentation, there was a clear message that one of the problems is that the participation is there and is not sometimes, and there is a contradictory in small countries which is related to the personal networking logics and everything related. So, is it so in your country, and how it works in your countries, and how you evaluate it works here in comparison with yours? The third sector participation in decision making, in preparation of decision making. We had big issue, as you know.
In a nutshell, the austerity measures and the crisis which followed really reawakened the civic society in the third sector. So in a way, same as it happens in Greece as well now, people started doing things together, making it easier, simpler, because if you have a traditional networks broken, then you have to create something new. So it, in a way, pushed people to work together. So there have been different ways how people found new businesses, women knitting together something for children and so on. I mean, different kinds which would never be imaginable. And this crisis really triggered the renewed activity of the third sector.
I think this is an issue where we've got feedback twice. First in the beginning of, well, I think it was year 2000 from 3 international experts, and then also in our OECD Public Governance Review 2010, that Finland actually has a good tradition in this, but that we maybe think we are better than we are in open policy making. And I think this is true. Finnish people are very pleased with the legislation we have, with the traditional methods, and then we can say that on the municipal level we are actually doing quite well, and also we have a municipal legislation is being redrafted now, and we're going to even add there some things. But when you come to the level of ministries, it's very traditional. It's very traditional, like consultation, very traditional consultation processes, and we have tried to work on this subject for many years, adding electronic consultation, more participation, more collaboration, but I think we have quite a lot to do in the area of the central government and state. We are part of the Open Government Partnership, and we have now new commitments, and one completely new area, which is clear language. And this is also one important thing that we find. We have the open procedures, open data, open that, but clear language actually is one problem in Finland in regard to the third sector being involved in the open policy making, because we tend to use language that nobody understands, so it's really hard to take part.
If you don't understand, it only looks Finnish.
Yeah, it only looks Finnish. So, but this is one area that we are trying to also. But then also the new ways that civil society works, we are not up to those yet, but we're trying our best at the moment.
Piet? Nele? Piet?
I think in the Netherlands the third sector works very well. Why it works well? Because they're financed partly by local governments and by state. In Estonia, I don't see this. In fact, I know only 3 NGOs who are financed by state. So
entirely?
In Estonia.
And in Holland, how much do you think?
I don't know, hundreds, thousands. So I think that's a problem. So I think in Estonia, the third sector, many NGOs are not very sustainable because nobody knows in January will we have money. So, and then many NGOs are financed by foreign funds. So by the Swiss funds or by the European Union or by the Norwegian funds. And what happens if after 5 or 10 years this financing stops?
Then they close it down, like Danish Institute has been closed down.
But will there be any
Recently.
NGOs in Estonia? Will there be a third sector?
Nele, could you add some?
Well, just as an observation, but what I see from on the streets in Brussels, of course in Brussels you have to distinguish that there is demonstrations and lobby geared, of course, towards influencing EU policy, but also there are manifestations on the streets in view of influencing Belgian politics. And I think this is a striking difference, is that in Belgium people come to the streets, they speak out. This is a culture of sort of holding your leaders accountable. So yes, it's a daily fact that somebody has a strike somewhere.
Any questions from the audience? During the discussions over the lunch, I've been asked by some people of extensive experience, local experience in Estonia, who actually claimed that the picture which has come up from the presentations in the first part of the conference was not touching one issue which is an emerging one, and the issue of substitutional activity, I would call it so. A lot of people in the public sector doing things which are not absolutely necessary, but which are things by themselves and which are mounting, accumulating, and a lot of efforts and time and resources, although already constraints, are wasted for such activities. The favorite example is actually from the lawmaking, where we are still continuously are proud of having enormous amount of new laws and changes in the law, although that probably it's not exactly the best way to tackle this problem right now, because the circumstances have changed. We are not transitional government, transitional society anymore like we were when the speedy lawmaking was justified very much. On the other hand, we have a lot of people who are engaged in very, very narrow activities, very formalized activities. For example, the European money related procedures, which is not bad because it brings in money, but which are very strictly formulated, very, very, very formalized, they're bureaucratized, and then at a certain point we also know that in upcoming years probably part of this money will disappear because of objective reasons. And what these people will do then, because they've been trained only for this, for splitting commas, like I say, what happens then? So is it true that you see some signs of this, not only in Estonia, but also in your own countries? Is it objective, or how do you see this problem from your point of view?
This problem is old as a Rome, as the saying goes. and actually, Tiina's and Külli's presentation was pretty nice in this. I mean, bureaucracy works by its own inner logic. I mean, it wants to maximize its place in the governance structure. It's reasonable enough. However, then there is independent reviewers, and this is what university research does. And you are lucky that you have Tallinn Technical University researchers who do this job on a daily basis. And then seeing and benchmarking, you basically can see what has been achieved, what is well, what is not so well. If you ask my own country, which I represent here, Latvia, we don't even have this. So we still have to achieve the level which you have in Estonia. So in a way, you're on the right track, so just keep going like that.
I think we struggle with this same problem in the sense that one of our weaknesses is that we don't have very much mobility, and that brings phenomena like people stay in the same ministry, they get very fond of their work, they are serving the nation, but they don't actually see the big picture, and they might get too narrow and too fond of their work, seeing it as, of course all the work is important, but they maybe see it in the big picture as a too important part. And we are trying now in all sorts of ways to increase the mobility from ministry to ministry, also of course private sector, public sector, municipalities, state administration, but it is a big challenge for us. But we are trying to now find structures. For instance, we're trying now to have the highest level directors to be kind of a pool where you have to have mobility, you have to change places from time to time, which is a little bit like in the Netherlands already has. We're trying to find ways, but it seems that Finnish people like to stay where they are, and that brings these problems.
So mobility within the state
Civil
government
service
system is a very important thing, and it should be a kind of steady policy implemented on a steady basis.
Yeah, we're trying to do soft ways like a guidebook on the mobility, but also then also structures that force
about
people to
3 years ago, there was a report from Arengu Fund which was about, among other things, touched this issue, also slightly the rotation issue, rotation between ministries and departments, and it broadens the view and gives additional experience to people, but nothing has changed very much since then. But it looks like it's a common problem. It's not a unique Estonian one.
But there is, for example, in Latvia we have the only horizontal rotation between ministries so far I've seen. It's between Ministry of Defense, Foreign Affairs, Interior Affairs, and Economics. So this happens on a certain departments. However, one problem, and this you can go to this book, which has been distributed to you, as I said already to Tina. If every Estonian will read this book, they will understand better how Estonian state works. It's really worth reading. But if any civil service wants to have stability, it's normal. I mean, you have to work. And then it depends on how smart the leader of the civil service is. And then this is in a way lottery. Or it's also the question of meritocracy. And I believe Estonian society has implemented the principles of meritocracy where the best of the best are moving upwards. So when you have it, then you have also rotation of the best people around.
I think in Estonia, because of the voting system, there's all the time there's a conflict between Estonian government and Tallinn city government. This is of course not very effective. Is that in Latvia too?
In a way, yes. Actually, one of the reasons why government fell is because we have, instead of all parties versus center parties in Estonia, we have all Latvian parties versus the Harmony Center parties. So unfortunately, it's a legacy of the Soviet past. So not tackled yet.
Yes, Mike, please.
Yes, I have a question for Nele, because as you have worked for the civil service in Estonian government as well for a long time for the European Commission, how you actually compare the work? Because in Estonia we are always complaining about the workload and no time to do your job, and nobody has no time for nothing and so on. But how does it feel in the EU structures?
Who starts?
Well,
I ask.
I had the privilege of working both in Tallinn, in the ministry, but also then in the capacity as representing the Ministry of Economy and Communications in the permanent representation of Estonia to the EU at the time when we were preparing during the accession to the EU and then in the aftermath. So to cut it short, my job or my life in Estonian administration was never boring. I think I've always worked too much. And but what perhaps is something that the European Commission is exemplary in is that it allows for the rotation, that people are very much encouraged to rotate, not to get too comfortable in their comfort zones, and there is a constant learning. It's just not possible. Of course, another tendency of the EU institutions is that because the staff number is always limited and functions keep piling up, is that there is a tendency to delegate out. So people need to change their profile accordingly. But yes, I think I would like to break this myth once and forever that also in the European institutions people do work a lot.
Any other questions? Please. Mike.
I have a question to Veiko. You said that in Latvia you took the law of double citizenship. Can you say which are the results of this law and how many new people with double citizenship have you there arrived?
Aitäh, thank you for a very good question. So it was expected there will be a bigger rush on having double citizenship. However, the latest data was, if I'm not mistaken, just below 10,000 people have applied. So they want to have, the very, very optimistic estimates are they want to have about 50,000 by next year's end. Because we had citizenship law which was taken over from the old constitution and legal framework of 1922, which was reinstated in 1993 when then Parliament was re-elected. Then citizenship law was amended in 1995. Basically, those who applied for citizenship could get it, then rest of them were barred, same as in Estonia, for example. Now, when we have it, as I said, less than 10,000, but the idea is to grant it to the biggest Latvian communities in EU, NATO countries, plus, as I mentioned, New Zealand, Australia, Brazil. And then, because there are also Latvian citizens or descendants of Latvian citizens who live in Russian Federation or in Israel, for example, with applying to the Cabinet of Ministers, they also can be procedured. So this issue is also resolved because this is one of the biggest issue which was to be brought even to the European Court of Human Rights, so we solved it as well. Thank you.
One question which I would address to those panelists who want to answer this. There has been in Estonia, in spite of all these nice words said about our own state organization, complaints from the market, at least from the entrepreneurship side, that it still can be more efficient. Yes, I can establish the company in 15 minutes, which is absolutely astonishing thing. I have a couple of times told to people they won't believe, or for example, signing important documents I have even shown abroad how it works. So this is fine, but still we have problems related to statistical part of the story. We still have disagreements, let's say, or some efficiency improvement possibilities in tax collection side and everything. So basically there is no ready thing anyway. And do you have the same problems in your countries? Are your entrepreneurs complaining about bureaucracy, overwhelming bureaucracy and economic issues or entrepreneurship issues? Does you have some similarities with Estonia, and how do you evaluate the situation yourself? In your countries or in Estonia or both?
I think entrepreneurs everywhere are complaining all the time anyway. But for example, in the Netherlands, there's a discussion which I think is very interesting to try to lower taxes on labor, so to make it more attractive to work, and increase taxes on luxury items or property. And for example, I know in the Netherlands there's a lot of people work and they get paid in just black without any taxes. And in Estonia it's the same problem, or it's much bigger even. And I think this is a very important thing. And also to if you want to get people out of unemployment, or people who are already for a long time unemployed, I think in Estonia the taxes on labor are relatively high. No?
Any other comments?
No, this is classical ideological debate, and perhaps the difference between Estonia and Latvia from one side and then Finland, Belgium and Holland from other side is that you've had a classical party system which has been developing without it being turned upside down by the Soviet experimentation. So therefore everyone knows, I mean, liberals are there, conservatives are there, social democrats are there. Our party system being renewed or implanted anew, and so therefore there are also these problems. The people don't understand, sometimes they don't think about what are the ideological backgrounds of certain issues. But businessmen complain everywhere, I agree with you. They complain everywhere because they want to have a special access. They want to have privileges, and remember what privilege means in Latin. It means the private law. Everyone wants it. So, and then it's a task of a government to say, no, there will be common rules for everyone, the same.
Yeah, but it's not only a political level issue, it's also a practice issue of practice, administrative practice, because it's not only how it is prescribed in procedures, but also how you implement them. For example, we have cases where we have rights for the state agency to take a decision half a year or more, and then even on top of that they can ask additional materials and start all over again. So these things are not related to the regulatory part only, because within these 6 months they can do it in 1 month, and they've done sometimes. And they can do all 6 months, spend somehow, and then ask additional materials, instead of asking them in 2 months or 1 month.
This is for
This is a practice issue.
Koostöö Kogu or some political party
Koostöö
to have
Kogu
it
is
as
not
issue
the-
for elections. Do it.
Koostöö Kogu is not a political entity in that respect, and it's not only a political issue, I think.
pressure.
It's a practical issue. In a general, you can say that the regulatory part is in place, okay, but you can do it differently within the framework of the very same regulatory.
But I think also the problem in Estonia is that the rules, the laws are taken, let's say, from the European Union. But very often the amount of money, if you compare it to what is available in Western Europe or in the old European Union member states, the amount of money everywhere is only a fourth or a third. So in the end it's very difficult to fulfill all laws and rules and regulations and guidelines. And there are many examples in Estonia. The guidelines, they were not even laws, but they took much too strict guidelines from European Union. And in the end it was impossible to implement them because there was no money.
So what you're kindly saying is what Estonians have known forever, that we tend to be, but we shouldn't be, more sacred than Pope. And this is something which we want to do all the time and has been suffering from even during the previous periods of our history.
But it's a question of money, as you just said, because if you look on the legislative process, how it goes, I mean, anything produced in Brussels goes to the European Affairs Commission in Riigikogu. From there, very often Riigikogu doesn't have a capacity to argue and legislate all the issues, so they very often delegate it to the executive arm, to the line ministries. And then obviously it becomes very technocratic and then becomes this holier than a pope issue. So in a way this is also a question of money and capacity. So we should have more people working with these issues in Riigikogu, for example.
Any questions? Heiki, please.
Thank you. I have a question to you, Katju. You are working in Finland quite intensively on the government renewal project. Would you tell to us a little bit on that? What is your big vision? What is your ambition? What are the options which are on the table, and what would be probably the outcome of that process? I think that might be interesting for our audience today. Thank you.
Yes, we have a central government reform ongoing, and it's actually just mentioned with one sentence in our government program, and now it has taken 2 years of planning, but now the government has made some decisions on how to proceed. And the original idea, which is the long-term vision, is that because we have 12 ministries which are very vertical silos, that we should, because we've been trying to do coordination over coordination over coordination, that we would make this more of a joint one whole of government, so that in the end these 12 ministries might form one agency. And the idea is that also us who are working, for instance, I work for the Ministry of Finance, we would all be working for the government. That would be our kind of employer. We are not there yet, so this is not the step that is going to be taken yet, but that's, for instance, our minister. My minister is, I come from the Ministry of Finance, but my minister is the Minister for Public Administration and Local Government. So she also says this is the long-term vision, to have this one unit or one unity, and this is why Scotland and Sweden are interested in us. But the things that we are doing now and the steps that we are taking is that first of all our government has decided that we will put together the different services and administration that the ministries have. Because I take an example, we have, in our 12 ministries, we have 8 different document systems. So we're trying to make these a joint service, like not maybe 100% of all, but issues like translation, security, personal administration, financial administration, etc. So that would be a joint unit for the ministries, and this work has now started. So the government has made the decision that we will start working on that. So that's one part. Then they have also decided to set up a committee where the members of the committee will be from the parliament, political parties in the parliament, and that will look at the government structure, because now if we want to merge 2 ministries or do any changes after the government changes into the ministries, it's a very long process, and it's for the parliament to do. So the government itself cannot decide if there are new ministries or what kind of a government structure we will have. So the idea is that in the future the government should be able to decide itself what are the parts of what ministries there should be. Not that we intend to change them every time, but that there would be this more flexible possibility. This is the number 2 part of this. Then we, like I mentioned, we are starting with also the making the ministries' leadership a joint pool, so that these will be the lead. Not everybody yet, the civil servants will be working for the government, but the state secretaries and the directors generals in the different ministries would have as an employer the government and not the particular ministry. So that would be a joint, kind of a joint workforce. Then I mentioned about the fragmented processes and the work that we are trying to do to integrate the processes more into each other, the government program process, the budget process, the legislation drafting process, plus the kind of evidence-based processes and the implementation processes. And this is also another project that is linked to this bigger picture. And then we still have this one part of this project, which is the working culture. So the other projects are more like top-down decisions from the government to start with this joint services of the ministries and so on. But this working culture, we are more trying to work bottom-up. We have formed different kinds of groups between the ministries and asked everybody to join who wants to join. And it's about working methods, very maybe for the daily life of a civil servant. Some of them include how to have better meetings. We tend to always have meetings for 2 hours and very kind of traditional. How to make them more efficient and more kind of productive, more nicer. How to have more distance working and all kinds of things that would affect the working culture. So that is also and a more joint up working culture, so that it would not be so much of a different culture in different ministries. So that is one part of that. So it's quite a huge project at the moment, and the steps advance in with a different timetable, with the vision of perhaps one more joined up government in the end. So this is basically the...
But the background is related to the very simple word efficiency, or
no?
Why?
No. If there is one goal over others, it is the fact that when the citizens vote for the parliament, and then the government is built from that parliamentary election result, and the government has a government program, then our goal is that we could actually have the government, the targets that are in the government program to have real impact, to make real change. So what changes we want in the society, that we would actually be able to implement them, and they would come the changes needed. Because now we have goals in the government program, majority governments, important goals in the government programs, but once we start implementing them, they fragment into these silos of the ministries, they fragment into or kind of get bits and pieces, go to the different processes, and we don't actually in the end achieve the change that we were looking for in the society. So that's the kind of main goal behind all this. That if we work more jointly, more strategically, we are able to achieve the goals that the people have voted for and the government has put in its government program. So that's the... There are other goals as well, but this is like mobility and others, but this is the main goal, perhaps.
Any questions? Piet, if I ask you, from your practical experience, what you would say are the first things to change in our local government level, if there is any?
They should be. They should fulfill the law. At the moment, they do not fulfill the law.
You mean?
Now, according to the law, every local government needs to have a child protection specialist, for example, or to offer transports or services to disabled people. Many local governments do not offer these services, so they're too small. There's no money.
So the reason is that they are not capable to do it, not because they don't want, but they just cannot.
There's no money. There's no manpower. They're too small. So you need to have much bigger local governments to offer real services and quality services.
So actually it's a justification of the administrative reform need.
Yeah.
Okay. Very simple thing, actually, but very difficulty going here. And as I understand, it's not our problem only. It has been a case in Finland, heavy case. It has been in Latvia. It has been once in Sweden, I know. Same in Netherlands, I think. In Netherlands, it's a long time ago, but still it was a case. Okay, any questions? Looks like there is no questions from the audience. To wrap up this session, I would say that first conclusion I've drawn from this is that we are better off from outside view than from inside view. Secondly, many of our problems, which we tend to consider being unique, they are not. They are actually very, in one way or another, one form or another, slightly differently at the first sight, but they are originally, they are very similar in smaller states. And even in all of them, or majority of them, and even in the states we tend to consider as our great examples. Third, there is a lot of space for improvement. There is no such thing like done state. And fourth, I think that the feeling, inside feeling, is that we should be proud continuously of what we have achieved, but we should learn more. We should learn more, and we should take some additional efforts to improve the state organization, taking into account all these contradictions which have been referred previously, taking into account that we are not capable to afford everything, to do everything at once, but still we need moving. We cannot please ourselves with the misleading conclusion that the state is ready, and if some money will be available additionally, that's okay. And this is main conclusion for me, which I suspected being a case already before, but even during this panel it hasn't been changed very much, at least for myself. So let's thank all our panelists and encourage them to continue their work, to continue their touch to Estonia, to continue and to do things they actually suggested themselves. Yeah. So thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you, Peter. Thank you, Peter. And now, coffee break.